This is the sixth session of a seven-part series brought to you by the Student Advisory Council to the Skinny Atlas Education Foundation. On behalf of the Student Advisory Council, Campbell Loy, Fatimah Wakas, and Hope Cross Jaya present their conversation with Shafiq Jalal and Helen Glowacki on first-generation immigrants and their experiences in America. We thank you for tuning in and hope that you enjoy this conversation.
Hi everyone, welcome. We would all like to give you the opportunity to introduce yourselves.
My name is Helen Glowacki, and I was born in Seoul, South Korea. I am currently a kindergarten teacher at Waterman School. This is my 5th year there, and I returned to teaching 5 years ago after being home, stay-at-home mom for 20 years. So that's been fun for me.
My name is Shafiq Jalal. I'm originally from East Africa, a country called Tanzania. I was born there and grew up there for the first 17 years of my life, and moved to the US to go to college. So that was my initial sort of immigrant's journey into the US, particularly Boston, which was a very exciting time as a young 17-year-old to experience that metropolitan urban lifestyle, mix of cultures, students from all over the world, and it was just a very exciting time.
Okay, so thank you for sharing your experiences with us, and thank you for introducing yourself to us. Our first question would be, when and why did you immigrate, and what was the process of immigration like for the two of you?
Well, I was 5 years old, so it was a long time ago. When we came to the United States, it was May 24th, 1974. I actually had to ask my mom the exact date because I knew it was May, but I couldn't remember the date. My memory, obviously, of that time is very faint, but I do remember bits of it. In Korea, there were 7 in our family. My parents, my 3 sisters, and myself. Our ages ranged from 1 to 7. I was the second oldest and 5 years old. We also lived with our paternal grandmother in Korea. My parents both were really hard workers. They both had, they worked really hard in Korea. My mother couldn't finish college because she had to support her family. So she went to work at a pretty young age, and she actually got a job as a secretary at an American Army base in Seoul. We wouldn't have had the opportunity to immigrate to the United States if it weren't for my mother working on in the American Army base for the length of time that she worked. I believe that is why we were able to come. If you didn't have a familial connection to someone in the United States, you weren't able to immigrate. But because she worked there, she was given the privilege to immigrate. And so my parents decided that we would have more opportunities. They would have more opportunities in the United States. And so the 6 of us, leaving my grandmother behind, immigrated in 1974.
So I came here as a student on a student visa to go to college. I was actually the first one in my family to go to college. That's really how my journey into the US began, as a student on what they call an F1 visa. It's a temporary visa which allows you to stay in the country as you pursue your higher education. After graduating from college, I got a job in the engineering field, and from a student visa, I had to apply for a work visa. It's a very extensive process, and I can say from my own experiences, it was a harrowing experience because despite my credentials and educational achievements, it was very, very difficult to find an employer who had the experience to hire a skilled immigrant and go through the visa process. I came here at the tender age of 17, leaving everything behind, everything that I knew, right? My experiences, my family members, and it was a mix of emotions. full of excitement and interest and, aspirations, as well as an element of fear, quite frankly, because you don't know. There's so much unknown, and you're very young, and you don't have the support system. So it made me grow up very quickly.
I'm just amazed as a parent now what my parents, the risk that my parents took, like you took, to bring their family to a country that, they really didn't know much about. I mean, they'd only, they had a couple of friends who actually my mom had a couple of friends who had immigrated some years before, but other than that, they really didn't know. And they just went hoping that they would find something better than they could have in Korea. They, when we first came to the United States, they both had to find work, and my mom was, she worked as a secretary, so she became a typist during the day, and my dad took a job in the factory. I think my mom said it was some kind of textile factory at night, so that somebody could be home for the four of us. Then a year later, we were able to bring my grandmother over. So my grandmother who lived with us, my paternal grandmother, and so she took care of us while my parents worked. And about 2 years after we first immigrated, my parents, after working for other people, decided that the surest way to be successful was to work for yourself. So they decided to rent a little space outside of a shoe store in the South Bronx. They basically had the space outside, except for the doorway, to peddle their wares, just like some of you might have seen, in New York City, people have tables out on the street illegally usually, but my parents actually rented a space outside a shoe store, and they started selling things like bags and accessories, hats and gloves in the winter and flip-flops in the summertime. And they started their business that way. And then eventually the shoe store owner wanted to sell his business, and they had saved up enough money to purchase the business. And then a little while later, my mom heard of a store around the corner that was available. So then she opened another store. And then my father bought the men's clothing store business right next to him. And so for many years, they ran the 3 stores, and we worked there in the summertime, my sisters and I. And that's how they ultimately, I think, accomplished their American dream, was working really hard, 6, sometimes 7 days a week, from 6:30, sometimes some days, to coming home at 7 p.m. Not really spending a lot of time with us because they didn't have the time, but my grandmother was there for us, and my parents, of course, were there for us. We knew we were loved and we were taken care of. So we still thrived.
Well, thank you guys so much for sharing your experiences. That was really good to hear. So our next question is, I guess we kind of got into this a little bit, but what was your expectation of America? What hopes did you have, or goals what did you have when you got here? And how did your actual experience compare to what you expected?
So I grew up watching American movies, TV, not a lot, coming from Tanzania, which is a British protectorate. There was more of a British influence than an American influence. But, going back to the 80s, pop culture and Michael Jordan and that era, that was a worldwide phenomenon. And so when I first came to the country, first thing I wanted to see was some serious urban basketball game. I've had a lot of sort of introspection on my journey and my time here in this country of the last almost 30 years now. And I guess my expectations, I think everyone's expectations change over time. And my expectations at the age of 17 were probably very different from my expectations now, right? And and going forward. But I certainly wanted to build a lasting career in my field, become sort of a known expert in my field, become a contributing, valuable member in the society and community at large. Those were my aspirations. I had heard plenty about the values, the American values of hard work and being genuine. Also had read about America being the melting pot, right, of the world. So those were some of my expectations, to see that the diversity of many races, which I did see and experience when I first came to Boston, although there were some diversions over time, where the acceptance from a racial lens, or as a migrant, an immigrant, there was definitely some level of prejudice that I did feel.
Well, for me, because I was 5, I don't, I really think of my parents' expectations, I guess. But when I think about myself and my sisters and other kids that I met who were who came to the United States around the same time, we were kind of in between, because we weren't the first generation and we weren't the second generation. Even though we're technically the first generation, our parents were the first generation. I was born in Korea, but I was so young that most of my growth, I grew up in the United States. And I had the advantage of having that solid, background. And, I knew the culture because it was part of me. I experienced it. And I experienced it, even in the United States, because my parents, we had Korean food. We didn't have American food in the house, just rarely. But we had that. But then I was also able to learn all of the wonderful things about, the American culture, and then other cultures that I encountered, other friends that I met in school who were not Korean and who were also immigrants. So that, like, acculturation process where you take the good from both, was something that I really was able to experience.
Thank you so much. And I know both of you may have already kind of gotten into this next question, but in terms of when you did immigrate here, and I know Ms. Glowacki, you mentioned the acculturation name, I think that was it.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea of being able to keep your native culture, but at the same time engage with the new culture. How were you able to do both of those at the same time and engage with them?
Well, my parents we didn't know the American traditions, of course, and so we didn't really celebrate Thanksgiving or any of the holidays that were traditionally celebrated in America. We did celebrate the Christian ones because we did go to church. We found a Korean church, actually, a Korean Methodist church in Queens, and so we celebrated Easter and Christmas, but we didn't celebrate the other holidays. And as my sisters and I learned about the other holidays from either school or from friends, we would ask my parents, can we do this? And they would try, but as I mentioned, they were very busy, and so not until we were adults, actually, I think most of us, my sisters, were either in college or out of college, did we actually have a more traditional Thanksgiving celebration with turkey and the fixins, because and in addition to Korean food, there was always Korean food, and then there was turkey. But until then, we really didn't have those, weren't able to include those traditions in our lives. My father always expressed his wish that we would share our culture with other people. And being a kindergarten teacher, it kind of makes it easier for me to share with my students. When my kids were younger, my own kids were younger, and I was at home, I would I would, and the teachers were wonderful about asking me if I would share, share stories about Korea, or, we would celebrate Lunar New Year. I think we did that for a couple of my kids during their years in elementary school. And a couple of years ago, the kindergarten team decided to, asked me if we could coordinate a Lunar New Year celebration. And I geared it toward Korean Lunar New Year because that's what I know. And I wanted to dispel the Chinese New. I mean, I think Chinese New Year is very well known, but I wanted to let people know that other countries, other Asian countries, celebrate Lunar New Year. So we talk about that a little bit, but then I mostly talk and share different traditions that I knew about. So I love to share. I love to share my culture with my kids in kindergarten. I teach them Korean songs. My Korean is definitely limited, but I teach them how to count and some simple words and whatever I know. So I have fun with that, and they seem to enjoy it. And it's amazing how well they learn it.
I haven't really been able to celebrate some of my heritage with people, at least here immediately in my community. However, a lot of my cousins and my brother sort of immigrated to the US as well. So I've been able to retain some of those roots and cultural identity through just interactions with my cousins, including the language and some of the things that we've had in common, those cultural roots about community, about family, the value of relationships. All of that has still been preserved. I married a Caucasian and American. So some of her sort of cultural experiences have been part of mine, right? Have become one with mine. So I think that identity maybe governs a little bit more because that is more immediate, and the kids experience that type of culture. But they make a point to speak with their grandmother, who can share her cultural experiences. A big thing that we celebrate in that part of the world, it's Eid, which is sort of a ceremony where you celebrate after the month-long fasting period called Ramadan. And people go out and meet with families, and there's a lot of gift sharing that happens, and it's a time of joy and just enjoying each other's company and really celebrating time with each other. I think that's the value that's so ingrained in that culture, the about community, that I do miss many times. A very large extended community that it's always about us and we, right, as opposed to I and me. It's a very different mindset that I've experienced here in this country versus my time in Tanzania. And maybe it's the Eastern or Asian sort of values about community that I do cherish, and I like to share that with others in this part of the world.
Well, thank you both so much. I really loved hearing about your experiences and your culture. So my next question is, what was the biggest cultural shock for you? And yeah.
I think for me, pop culture, right? And when I talk to your Aunt Christine, and she brings up the various things that, TV shows and various things that she experienced as a child. I can't always relate to some of those things. 1993 forward are, that period is a little more relatable to me than pre-1993, which was the time that I, was in Tanzania with very different cultural experiences. I wouldn't say cultural, but the one thing I immediately noticed was that people drive on the right side of the road. Where I grew up, I drove on the left side of the road. And it was quite an adjustment period when I first started driving. And I remember, I started driving on the right side of the road. And then I happened to be visiting Tanzania on a summer break. And I found myself driving on the right side of the road with an oncoming car. No. And thinking, why is that person driving on the wrong side of the road? So I almost killed myself and the other driver, but I swerved. But those were some of my experiences.
I just remember everything being strange and new, and going to kindergarten. My mom walked me to I remember her walking me to the door of the kindergarten class, and this was May 25th, so there was only a month of kindergarten left. But she walked me in and she said, there are no Korean kids in this class. So there were some Koreans in Queens at the time. My sister, actually, my older sister, who should have gone to second grade, was placed in a first grade class, and there was a Korean child in her class, but there were none in my class. And I said, it's okay. I had a wonderful ESL teacher. Her name was Miss Pryor, and she pulled me out. I remember her pulling me out of my class in first grade, and she taught me how to speak English. And by third grade, I was fine. But the one thing I remember that really shocked me is it happened in kindergarten also, and it has to do with cheese. So in Korea, we didn't have cheese. There are not a lot of cows in Korea. We didn't have a lot of dairy. And so I'd never really had cheese. And so I remember a silver platter coming towards me in kindergarten, and all I saw were white cubes that to me looked like tofu, because I know tofu and I like tofu. So I saw it and I was hungry. So I put one in my mouth, and it must have been strong cheese, because I puckered my lips and I spit it right out and I put it right back on the platter. I remember that distinctly. So it's kind of silly, but that was definitely a shock to me. The taste of cheese, any strong flavors that I'd never had before.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing that with us. This has been such a great interview so far, and now we're going to get to the closing of this with our last question, which is, what do you wish more people knew about immigrants?
Well, that's a loaded question there, especially in this day and age, where there's been such misinformation and myths about immigrants and what they represent in this country. It's quite frankly very unfortunate that we have come to this, because I have always been told and have known that this has been a nation of immigrants, a melting pot, right? That everyone, despite their creed, culture, religious background, would be welcome, openly welcome. And the rhetoric of the recent past from our leaders has been unsettling to me as an immigrant. And I've always made it a point to be a very good representation of the immigrant at large, whenever I'm interacting with an American, about really putting my best foot forward, talking about, ethics and morality and integrity, all of those things that are so important to just about any culture, right? And when you hear demeaning remarks from the highest leadership in this country, it's demoralizing at times. You feel like you're not worthy, and you're being sort of seen as a second class, and it's very unfortunate and very unfair, because I think immigrants contribute a lot in this country and have done so for generations, right? I think promoting immigration really promotes innovative ideas and that entrepreneurial spirit. That's, I think, going back to Helen, to your family, right? And starting that business and really trying to build that American dream. I think those are every immigrant's aspirations.
Absolutely. Yeah, I wish more people believed what I believe, and I think what you, Shafiq, believe, and is that most immigrants are grateful for the opportunities that this country has given us, and we want to give back. We want, and that's exactly, it's pretty much what you said. And I wish all people could be welcoming of all immigrants and open to the rich culture that we have to share, and not think of immigrants just as, one group. We all come from different places, and we have varied things, and so much to give to and share. So I wish that we could all be viewed for what we can contribute,
And I think to add to that, to echo that, we do come from all walks of life, high skilled, low skilled, regardless, we're all contributing to the society one way or the other.
Right.
And we're always sort of typecast as those that just want welfare, right? They're all on welfare. They're leeches, and it's not an accurate representation of who we are, who I am for sure. I want to be a productive member and to contribute to my community and be a good Samaritan, and continue to engage in the American dream, the promised land, as they say. So here I am, and this is where I belong. This is my country. After 30 years of being in this country, I am proud to call this my home. This is my only home, right? And interestingly, when I do visit Tanzania, I do feel like a stranger. And there are some things that are familiar to me, the language, the food for sure, right? Some of the friends and family that I've left behind. But I do call the US and West New York, where I am, my home, And so, I take great offense when I have been approached in the past and being told, go home, go back home where you came from. And it's a demeaning remark, and I have to excuse them, those people, for those views, for their views. And I think we need to engage in exactly this type of dialogue to eliminate those myths about immigrants and what we stand for.
Thank you guys so much for this discussion. I feel like we got a lot of really good conversation going. So thank you guys so much for being so open with your experiences and willing to share.
Thank you for including me.
Thanks for having me. I think it was a great conversation. Helen, really enjoyed your learning about you and your stories. And
Same here.
this is this is a really important topic. So I applaud you, the three of you, for picking this topic. It's an important one, and this should be part of our conversation at the national level.
Also, sorry, can I chime in? So I'm an immigrant myself, and hearing your stories has been so inspiring. And I didn't know how much I needed this conversation until today, because I have not met many immigrants here in America, especially I think I've only met one or two other immigrants until today. And hearing your stories has just been so, I guess it feels like home listening to them, because I was just talking to my mom the other day how much I miss my family back home. So thank you for joining us today and talking to us about your experiences. It's been a lovely conversation. So thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this conversation with Shafiq Jalal and Helen Glowacki on first-generation immigrants' experiences. For more information on the Student Advisory Council and the Skinny Atlas Education Foundation, please visit scanedfoundation.org. Thanks a lot.